Okay, hello and welcome to my channel. My name's Toy. I am doing a deck review for the Sub-Zero deck that I ran at Alberta Beatdown just this past weekend. I've had a few requests to talk about this deck. I know there's very little like research and results for some of the MK stuff. Hasn't been really many major tournaments, and Alberta Beatdown's the biggest tournament that we get in Western Canada here. So we had 20 people show up. I ended up placing second with the Sub-Zero deck. Liu Kang took first. I was not prepared for the Liu Kang at all. I didn't run anything. I didn't expect to be running into that kind of deck whatsoever. I have lots of stuff in here for like Reptile or Quan Chi and like Spike type matchups, but not for what Liu Kang was bringing. But that's okay. So I'm going to talk about this deck. Also, another thing to note about this deck is that it is far, and I mean far, from an optimal build. When I built this deck, I owned 0 Bebop cards. Like, I mean 0. Like, I didn't own any. I had to bum a playset of Fei off Garrett to make this deck. And then, even then, I only bought the Mortal Kombat starter decks, and I had to, again, bum commons and uncommons and, like, 1 or 2 rares off of other people in my play group to build this deck. So, this deck is far from optimal. There's lots of stuff you can do to adjust it. Lots of, like, counter meta picks and things you can change, but the engine and the ideas behind this deck still all work, and they're still very, very solid, and they're the things that I rode on this deck. Like I'll get to that. Okay, so I'll go through the cards. I'll probably jump around a whole bunch because there's lots of things I want to explain, and yeah, hopefully you can follow along. So this is an order deck. First thing I'm going to go over is the assets. I played Hanya because a lot of the attacks that I'm running are also weapons, and even if not, Hanya is a brilliant card. One of the things if you're running a stun character is you still, even if you stun out their entire board, you still need to get attacks through. So if you're only running 3 speed attacks and you're trying to get an attack through an opponent, even if their board's stunned out, they can still block you, right? And Hanya is going to help you deal with that. Is you can throw weaker attacks, and especially because of Sub-Zero's +2 damage, and they might not want to discard those cards if you throw a weaker attack first. And I'll show you the attack that I used for that in the deck. You can often get a Hanya trigger off of it, and then that kind of operates as a +1 speed on the rest of your attack lineup, which is important because the way Sub-Zero works is you typically either are going to try to sneak through grindy damage turn for turn, or you're going to try to close them out with a big hammer. But anyways, I'll get into that. So Hanya's in the deck because it's incredible. There's also defensive plays you can make with this that I didn't end up putting in the deck, but I think I talked about that in my Ride video. I'm running 1 copy of Defenders of the Empire. What this does is if you're playing a male character, you can commit this card. After you commit 1 or more foundations, due to your effect, you can commit one of their... after your opponent commits 1 or more foundations due to your effect, commit 1 of their foundations or assets, which is brilliant when you mix that with flip 1 of your foundations, seal 1 of your opponent's foundations or assets, and commit it. So you could just flip something, commit something, use this, commit an additional thing, right? So basically what this let me do is between Sub-Zero and Defenders is it let me lock down just tons of stuff. Like, it was just a really strong package. So ran 1 of each of those. The action card I ended up running was I run 3 copies of Stop. I definitely expected to run into more really character strong things. This ended up doing really nothing against Liu Kang, which was unfortunate because he clogged me so hard right out of the gate that I couldn't really stop him. Plus, I think Prepare to Fight would have been significantly stronger in that matchup, but I gave all my copies away because that's what I'm like, and I didn't feel like trying to hustle some down for this event, and I ended up being okay other than that matchup, and it was really unfortunate that that's who I ended up pairing into in the finals, but hey, that's what happens. I would strongly suggest running some Prepare to Fights either main or sideboard if you're building an order subs deck, especially for the current meta. So attack lineup. So the entire attack lineup, except for 3 cards, is order water, and there's an important reason for this. But I'll get into that. So the 3 that aren't are Death Valley Faceplant. It's a stun, it's a throw. It's really good because with sub you can give it the +2 damage, which puts it at 7. Which is a great number because it means at half damage you're still going to be doing 4 damage, which triggers the E on it, which means you'll gain 2 life and be able to target commit something in your opponent's staging area. So this card's incredibly strong. This was also a really good opener. If my opponent wasn't packing Throw Hate, this helped me get guaranteed momentum in order for Deep Freeze, or for us some other things in the deck. It also just helped me get chip damage through. It was a really solid card. It was a mid block for the Reptile matchup that I knew I was going to inevitably run into. Just absolutely powerful. This was also the card that I sided out the most. in order to make my attack lineup a water lineup, and I'll get into that when I get to the sideboard. This card's incredible. Really strong in order subs. If you're going to build water subs, I still suggest running a throw of some sort. I know there's like, what is it, Oichi throw from E-Honda has stun on it, but it doesn't have a block. You could also run Spider Suplex. I know it doesn't have stun, but that's okay because it's still really powerful and it kind of fills the same slot. The deck foundation for this works pretty well off water. You don't get the foundation cheese I'll show you in a bit, but it's still in there. I ran 4 copies of Deep Freeze. This card was an incredible opener, like absolutely incredible, especially for Sub-Zero. So you'd use stuff like Death Valley Faceplant or Lightning in order to net yourself momentum in the early game, and then you'd use it with Deep Freeze as your opening attack. And what Deep Freeze was for is I played this with the intention of it getting blocked. So because it's so slow and so cumbersome, like this thing almost never landed. I think I managed to get it to stick once, maybe twice all day, but I never expected it to. I was always expecting to throw this, use it to seal 3 things, stun 3 things, and then rip a block out of their hand, and then hopefully rip a second block out of their hand with Sub-Zero's effect, depending on the matchup. So that's what this card was for. It was a road paver. The other card that fights for this slot is Hyper Bomb. I feel like Deep Freeze is significantly better in Sub-Zero, significantly, just because of its ability to seal 3 things, which also paves the way for, Frost Hammer, right? So, incredible card, absolutely incredible. I ran this thing at 3 copies originally. Actually, no, what was it? I ran it at 2 copies, and I was running Hyper Bomb. I was running like 4 Hyper Bomb, 2 Deep Freeze, and then just the more and more I played Sub-Zero, the more Deep Freezes came in, and the more Hyper Bombs came out, because this card was just, this is what locked me down kill turns. It takes care of hate cards, takes care of just so much stuff. So good, especially mixed with Sub. You can take care of 3 foundations plus an asset just right out of the gate. That's huge. I was running 4 Lightning. This was actually ran on a suggestion, and I am so thankful that I ran this card. Filthy good. What this card let me do is it let me, as I was going through my matchups, this card let me control basically my opponent's ability to have deadlock abilities in their staging area, and it let me build out into deadlock and not have to worry about things. And there was another card I'm running that was helping me do that, but Lightning was one of the big pieces of that. So what you would do is I would play, if I could get myself momentum, either by attacking with Lightning, my opponent not wanting to discard cards, or by using a throw, and then I would throw Lightning out. I would snipe their deadlock ability, their foundations, with Sub-Zero, and then use Lightning, discard momentum, and chuck it into their staging area, into their card pool, so that they have to lose it. And I would do that in order to let myself more freely build into deadlock, so that my opponent had less abilities or less things to punish me for it, right? And that won me quite a few games, just being able to control what they had for deadlock effects, especially because some opponents I had were all their deadlock effects were in their staging area and none of them were in their attacks, and I just punished them ruthlessly for it with Lightning. And then if they tried to build into deadlock to keep up with me, the deadlock E on this thing just made it even worse for them. So this card was incredible. +0 mid block, also incredible, and Sub-Zero can put damage on it, and it makes this thing really unappealing to block. So this card was just incredible. Did tons of work. One of the best cards I was running all weekend. Frost Hammer. This is your kill card. I mean, it's not your only kill card, but it's your primary kill card. +1 speed for each sealed foundations, +1 damage for each committed foundation. It carries stun 1. It's a weapon as well, so it's working with Hanya. It's just, this is pretty bread and butter Sub-Zero stuff. If you're not running for this in Sub-Zero, I really don't know what you're doing with your life. So strong. This is how I ended games lots of times, is I'd pave the way with other attacks, and then this thing would just come in and they wouldn't be able to deal with it because they'd be stunned out. They'd usually have a Hanya trigger on them. I'd use something to put speed on it other than it itself if they had a way to cancel it, and then the damage usually cleaned them up. Icy Slide, another almost must-have if you're playing a Sub-Zero stun build. It's just, this was another kill card. It wasn't quite as strong as Frost Hammer, but it did. It just came in for massive damage. There was a few games where I was throwing this thing turn 1, or I'd throw a pair of it turn 1. There's some really funny games where that happened, but even turn 1, 2 Icy Slides, one's coming in for 5, and the second one's coming in for 7 if you're going second, or if you're on the draw. So this card was really good. Incredible stats. It does incredible things. You can throw it at the end of chains, relatively safe, especially with the build that I'm doing. I could throw it fairly safely in my chains, and it's just, this card did tons of work as well. Then I was reading lots of the boards and on the Discord, and this card actually first got put in because Tim Keefe was speaking its praises so highly. And if you haven't read Tim Keefe's reviews of the Mortal Kombat cards and characters on Reddit, I strongly suggest that you go do that, because he is a brilliant deck builder and player, and you should definitely pay attention to what that guy has to say. So Ice Burst, you run it because it's a stun 2 and it's a 4 speed. So remember what I was saying earlier about even if you stun your opponent out, you still need ways to get things through. And Ice Burst was one of those cards. Plus, you can just discard 1 momentum to seal one of your opponent's foundations. So it kind of worked as more of a bread and butter version of Defreeze. Only you could play it in addition to, it carried the high block instead, it carried 4 speed. So this was an interesting card because it was a very good card to play second or third in the chain because you put 2 damage on it and it's a 4 speed, and usually if you're playing it second and they blocked your first attack, or if they didn't block your first attack, whatever, they're very often my opponent was committing more cards to try and block this, and that was very beneficial to me. The discard 1 momentum to seal something, I think I only did that once, but the stun 2 is really big on this too. It being a mid also helped with the reptile matchup, because when I did play into that matchup, I ended up siding out, I think 2 Icy Slide, 2 Frost Hammers, or it was like 2 Icy Slides and a Frost Hammer to bring in some more mid attacks against him or something, I can't remember. But I wanted to build this deck in order to be able to handle certain things, and this card went a long way to do that. And it's just great block coverage. The starter decks are incredibly powerful in Mortal Kombat. I suggest you pick up definitely a few copies of it. So that was the attack lineup. Getting into the foundations, I'm going to talk about the ones I played 4 of first, and then we'll go into the other ones. These 2 cards mixed together, Cryomancer's Descendant and the Professor Lost. These cards mixed together were 100% the reason why I decided that I could play Sub-Zero, because until I figured out the interaction between these 2 things, I didn't even think it was playable. I was like, Order has a problem about just locking down kill turns, and this solved my problem. This was ridiculous. The combo in between these 2. So if you don't know how this works, what you do is you play a stun attack, you use Sub-Zero's Enhance to put damage on this attack, then you flip over Prof Loss after your stun attack receives a damage bonus, respond, draw a card, respond, draw a card, and then Cryomancer is Sub-Zero R, destroy. After one of your foundations is flipped, unflip 2 foundations. So then you crack this thing after the second one's flipped, unflip them 2. And because Cryomancer's Descendant opens up a response window within the original response window, the Cryomancer's Descendant response window closes and it goes back to the original response window, which you can then flip Professor Lost again, right, within the same trigger window. So then if you had another Cryomancers, you could crack that one, unflip them, and flip them again, and you could draw piles of cards off of 1 pump trigger. And because the draw was response based, and because Cryomancers is response based, it was incredibly difficult for my opponent to interact with it, right? They could still interact with basic draw hate, but anything that canceled enhances couldn't touch this. And because I had multiple ways to put damage on things, it was very difficult for them to just lock out my damage pump on my stun attacks in order to stop me from going off on this. So this was huge. The most cards I drew off of it in the event was 8. I think I got an 8 combo off with it. 6 happened a few times. Really, really strong. This is, if you're playing subs and you're not running Cryomancer's Descendant and abusing that R destroy, I honestly don't know why you're playing Sub-Zero, because this is something that only he can do, is just do these massive response chains. And there's a couple other cards you'll see that I'm running in the deck specifically because of this, and because I could tutor this and set my stage up this way. Anyways, 4 of both of those, because it was so gross. So gross. I had to go and get a playset of these off Garrett. So this is just my speed reduction. I was running Rescue Mission, but then Fei Fei is just cheaper. It's got a block on it. It's just... it did everything I needed to do, and then I also have Cryomancers, which can unflip it if I really needed to, or I have, what is it in here, blah, 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 let's go through it, left to die. If I flipped it over, I could also pick it back up and then play it again and do other stuff, right? Like, you just have ways to recurve flip effects, so incredibly strong. That's what I was doing, it's just some basic stuff. Artifice Avarice, so this isn't just run for X because I can draw a card when I check it by accident. I think that's a really stupid reason to run this card, but I know lots of people do it that way, and I apologize if you do it that way, but I think you're done. Order Attack gets +2 speed. Again, going back to the fact that if you're running a stun-based deck, you still need a way to put speed on it to land those attacks through, because your opponent may still have ways to, come up with a block that might be running 0 blocks, so they can still chump stuff out. You can't use that as a guaranteed way. Artifice Avarice let me just chip people down, because I could stun them, and then I could just do some basic math, dig through their discard pile, see what their average block mods were, see what they kind of guess what they'd have in their hand, put just enough speed on it so that I knew they wouldn't be able to deal with it, and I was cranking chip damage through people all the time with this card. This card also combos incredibly well with Armor Expert. Players with more than 10 foundations add 1 foundation to the top of their deck. So as I was saying earlier, this deck took care of people's deadlock abilities so that I could push into deadlock, and then I would use my Artifice Avarices. I'd put speed on things, then I'd flip them to Sub-Zero's effect, then I would use Armor Expert to throw them back on top of my deck, check them for my next attack, and then draw more cards. So on top of drawing crap tons of cards for the Cryomancer's combos, I was then using Armor Expert Avarices to draw more combos. Like on some kill turns, I was sitting with like 16 cards in my hand after playing 2 attacks. Like, it was just ridiculous. I ended turns with 7 cards in my hand. Like, it was nuts just how many cards I could be drawing with this deck. It was insanity. So that's Avarice. That's what that does. Destruction of Lin Kuei. This card's really cute too. So destroy a face down foundation. This attack gets -2/+2. So this card, additionally, when mixed with phase, really gave me some good block reach because it was just lots of speed reduction. It also gave me more pump triggers if my opponent thought they could just revoke out the Sub-Zero pump in order to start my draw combos. So this card just helped me pave a lot of things. I could probably drop this down to 2 copies now after playing this a few times. I'd probably drop this down to 2. I'd probably increase, Resurrected Revenant would probably go up to 3 copies, but I'll get into that. So yeah, really strong card though. It's got a beautiful 2+I block, and it's just solid stuff. It did lots of things. The other thing it let me do is it let me flip things face down, destroy them, and then grab them with Resurrected Revenant, and then throw them back into play. So it was another way that I could recurve foundations and get more value out of them. So speaking again about deadlock abilities, Securing His Destiny. So I ran this because a lot of the strong deadlock abilities are just like, they're not keyword based. They're just deadlock, blah, 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 right? And Securing His Destiny basically just let me control those. So I would have to dig, again, every single turn, I was digging through my opponent's discard pile. Anytime my opponent checked cards, I was digging through their discard pile. I needed to know exactly what was in their deck at all stinking times, because what I need to know is how their deck scaled and what effects would be going off at what times in the game, whether it was early, mid, or late game, and what was more important. So Securing His Destiny was really crucial to that, and how hard I dug for this card determined what attacks are running and the abilities on those attacks. This card was incredibly valuable to me over the weekend. I would mulligan trying to find this thing. I would be just trying to rip cards out of my hand for no reason, just trying to find this thing. Going back to Armor Expert, I would let attacks hit me just so that I could Armor Expert on them to see more cards, to see if I had to review that to try and find different cards that I needed in this deck. Like sculpting my staging area was very important. So yeah, just because there's so many things that I wanted to deal with. So if they had deadlock-based attacks, I was digging for this thing and trying to tutor this thing as best as I could. And if they were running deadlock-based foundations, then I was doing the same thing with lightning, right? Anyways, incredible card. Also, it shuts off so many things, right? Like even the Coffee Samba gets done. You could just say no to that crap, right? Like people try to parry you, you just say no to that crap. You just say no to any attack-based garbage that you just don't want to deal with. Just say no. Cool and Focused, just blocky boy. This thing's really strong, especially in any deck that can tutor foundations. Really, really strong. Also going back to Left to Die, so you could, if you played Cool and Focus and then you ended up flipping it to Sub-Zero's effect, you could then grab it with Left to Die and then use it to block with and all that kind of stuff. It just, again, it's a really good, really strong card. Any deck that can move foundations around can take really strong advantage of this. Also, the E once per turn for both players to rip top card of their deck if they run stuff like anything that can control what the top deck or their top card of their deck is. If they're throwing it from discard pile, momentum top, whatever. Cool and Focus lets you rip one of those per turn. So this card it also put in tons of work. The 4th copy was in the sideboard. Left to Die, we already talked about this. I'm running 2 copies. There it is. Left to Die, I already talked about this. If your attack's not blocked, you can, or if an attack is not blocked, yours or your opponent's, you can add one of your face downs to your hand. The cool thing about this card that I learned to love over the weekend, it's after an attack is not blocked, not after an attack deals damage or an unblocked attack deals damage. It's just after it's not blocked. So great. Also, the discardable momentum to ready this definitely came in handy a few times as well. So I don't know if I'd run 2 of it. I might drop this down to 1, maybe, because there's so many ways to just monkey around with foundations in this, but I don't know if I need the 2nd copy. To more testing would tell. Resurrected Revenant, I would easily bump this up to 3. My deck is 75 cards. I would probably want to run 3. If you're one of those people that likes to run 60 card decks, 2 might be the right spot for you. I still almost want to see 3 because I want to see this card every single game. And the second that you see 1, the ability to draw off it compensates for the second one that you draw. Also, it's got a +2 low block, which is a good block on it. So it's not even like it's 100% dead if you see it in your hand. It still has some value. Additionally, you can still flip it to Sub-Zero and play another copy, and you're not exactly dying on that play either, right? There's things you can do around it. But what this thing let me do is it let me take the turns where you're only planning on playing one thing. Like if I'm there's lots of times where I've just played a Death Valley faceplant with the idea of getting momentum, and then I'd pump it, I'd flip something if I needed to, and then I'd Revenant, seal my character, tutor something out of the discard pile, and play it that turn in order to sculpt my staging area. And that came in a lot. That was how one of the big ways how I'd set up prof loss chains. It was also how I would grab Securing His Destiny if I knew I needed it come mid game. Like it just let you do lots of things. Additionally, I would also do it with Lightning, where I'd play Lightning, I'd use the momentum to do stuff, and then put damage on it, and then Revenant, and blah, 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 right? Like, any turn where you're only planning on building or using one attack and trying to net value that way, this card just put in so much work. Like, aside from the fact that you can use it defensively to grab Cool and Focus, to grab whatever you need as a block, just incredibly, incredibly powerful cards. Resurrected Revenant, I'm saying it too many times, and Undying Rage from the Scorpion starter, just super powerful foundations. There's some of the first unique foundations where I want to run 3 and arguably 4 copies if I have enough functions for the card outside of it in the staging area. I haven't quite hit 4 copies of Undying or Resurrected yet, but I'm definitely looking for decks where I can justify it. Such a strong card. Armor Expert, I talked about this. I am running 3 copies. There it is. Players with more than 10 add 1 to the top of their deck. This came in super handy because I actually went into deadlock on over half of my games. So this card put in tons of work, and like I said, the R respond after after you're dealt damage by an unblocked attack, draw a card. This helped against discard matchups. It also helps me see more cards in my deck, so that if I need to find attacks, I can dig out for attacks, I can dig out for whatever. It helps me find more blocks. It's just such a powerful card, super powerful. Not enough people run it. Also, again, +2 low block, really great. I was running 2 extended lifespans. You could probably easily run more of this card. I was only running 2. It also operates on a baby level the same way that Professor Lost does, because you can flip after your opponent adds any number of cards to their hand, draw a card. So it's the same thing. You flip it, draw a card, unflip it, blah, 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 blah. And you can do the chain with this card as well, although you have to, it's less likely to trigger. There are things you can run that force your opponent to draw, because after your opponent draws any number or adds any number of cards to their hand during the combat phase, not because of their effects, just during the combat phase. So you can force that to happen, trigger this thing, and you can get it off that way. Sub-Zero's not as adept at doing it off of this card, although you can do it off of this card. So that's just something to keep in mind. I was running 2 copies of Ageless and Wise. This card was actually dead the entire weekend. I did not run into a single person running any kind of foundation removal, which was weird. I just ended up dodging those matchups. So that's kind of why I ran this. It was against like self-destructs or any of that kind of stuff, because like I said, I was building pretty beefy staging areas. So this card just never ended up putting in as much work as I wanted. I'd still argue for running a copy or 2 just because the deck wants to go late and it excels at going late. So this card ends up being valuable, but I'm also running, Pursuing a Vendetta. So I don't even know if I need this, but this is good just to shut those things down, whereas Pursuing a Vendetta doesn't directly shut them down. Pursuing a Vendetta is really good because, again, R flip after a foundation leaves your staging area due to your opponent's effects, add 1 from your discard back into your staging area committed. So it also can do the flip, unflip, flip, unflip combo with Cryomancers, right? You can just go off with it during the window. So if they're playing Ermac or they're playing whatever and they just destroy one of your foundations, you're like, sweet, tutor something, and you can, if you have both of them out, you can just do a tutor chain, right? And again, in a deck like with Resurrected Revenant, that's why I want 3 of it, because Order has so many really niche like counter cards, I guess, that the ability to tutor exactly the counter you need for the matchup, massive. That's so huge. And I found myself viciously digging for Revenant almost every game. I was running 2 Lin Kuei Grandmasters. the ability to commit any foundation for stun pump was really big, because then you could flip things, commit them, and then nuke them for other stuff, right? Like there's just things you could do with it. And then committing one sealed foundation in your opponent's staging area, that came in quite a bit, because you could play deep freeze, seal 3 things, use Lin Kuei to knock them over. Then you could use the stun, and then they couldn't just commit the sealed ones, they'd commit other stuff as well. So it was really good that way. It put in a surprising amount of work. It also has a 6 check on it, so every once in a while, I would end up committing this, flipping it, and throwing it on top with Armor Expert, and then getting the 6 check off of it. And it's also got 2+ high, which is great. 2 What Lies Ahead. This card, what it lets you do is it lets you do an Armor Expert effect, even if you're not in deadlock. So you can, if you get the Avarice and you get the What Lies out, you can crack this thing, throw the Avarice on top, still make the check with the Avarice, get the 5, draw a card, and keep moving forward. What it also does, it lets you get guaranteed momentum, because you can commit it, and your attack will always deal 1 damage. So this was good for helping me gain momentum, because Order is not the greatest at gaining momentum right now, so you kind of need to be a little bit tricky about it. This card let me do that. It also is throw hate, and so I was running this for that as well, where I could commit it and then full block and then only take 1 damage. So amazing card. I almost always run it at least 2 copies in my Order decks. Then the one-ofs, I was running 1, Quest for Vengeance. This thing was only really used if I could tutor it and if I felt like I needed to. And because you're not running, like this card, I got convinced out of running more copies of it, and I'm super glad, because if you run multiple copies of this card and your opponent sees it in your discard pile, or they see it in your staging area, they'll prepare for it, right? Whereas if you're only running 1 copy, it's very easy to conceal that information and then abuse it or catch your opponent off guard. And that has a significant value in and of itself. So that's what this card was for, just for catching people with their pants down. Retreated to Arctica. This thing I think only really went off like once, maybe twice during the whole week. I don't know if I love this card yet. I really like the effect. So before the damage step, if this attack has 3 more keywords, reduce it to 0. And it's enhanced, so you just crack it, and it doesn't matter what else they do to the attack, it's just going to deal 0 come damage step. So it usually just stops your opponent from even bothering with that attack if they can't deal with this, which was nice. But the 3 or more keywords is dead in quite a few matchups. So I don't know if I love this card yet. I don't know if I even want to run it at 1 of in a lot of decks right now. This might be sideboard fodder, because there's so many good cards in Order right now. I just don't know if that's worth the space. For Mother Russia, speed reducer that's playable while committed. So you could commit it with Lin Kuei to get damage off of it, or you can commit it for the draw hate. Again, because Sub-Zero can also kind of second hat as just a discard deck. So then if you're trying to discard cards and they want to draw stuff in the off turn, you can just use this to kind of mitigate their draw. Just tricksy stuff like that. Really good card. It synchronizes really well with what Sub-Zero wants to do and what the deck itself wants to do. 1 refusing let go, because this card's just really strong. Return things printed damage, +2 or -2. There were situations where, because I haven't played UFS a ton lately, I missed pretty easy kill turns. Or at least I missed killing people a turn earlier, because I probably could have refusing my own attack to give it +2 damage and then put my pump on it afterwards. But I was just like so routined of going through my staging or my pump a different way that by the time I got back down to refusing, I was like, oh crap, I'm missing damage. That's my own play mistakes. But it's another way to put damage on things, so you can trigger your draw chains. It's just damage resets. I know lots of people are running damage reset hate right now, but doesn't make this card any less valuable. Also, it's recurable. Like, you can reuse this thing every stinking turn. Like, destroyable damage reduction, I don't really love, or even like soft cost flip damage reduction, I'm not the biggest fan of. But this, every single turn you can use this thing. Super beefy. And then last but not least, Living Pendulum. This is a really tricksy card, because after your opponent plays an ability that modifies speed, cancel it. Okay? Anything that modifies the speed, increases, decreases, whatever. Also, it hits characters. Big thing. It hits characters. Okay? So that's an important line. Okay? There's nothing on here that says can't hit characters or non-character effect. It hits characters. This card I almost always run at 1. It ended up not being super relevant. I know a lot of Mortal Kombat is more discard focused, and there's a lot less just monkey speed on things, but it's still really good. This thing, even though it wasn't super live, it was still really clutch in a lot of matchups. And there's some characters like Satoshi where this thing's just like, oh, good luck, you know. So really strong. Sideboard, I ran 4 Emperor of Muay Thais, mostly because I couldn't really think of a great sideboard. And like I said, I don't own any Bebop cards, and I own very little Mortal Kombat. and I didn't know really what else to run. So I ran this thing, again, because this thing combos with Cryomancer, right? So flip, after you commit any number of foundations, ready 2 foundations that have not been readied. So if your opponent is not paying attention, you can basically use this in Cryomancers to ready your entire staging area, because they're just being dumb, right? Again, you can flip this, ready 2 things, unflip it, flip it, ready 2 things, and blah, 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 and that's kind of what this thing was for. It was also high block if I needed it. There was also the 4th copy of Cool and Focus in my sideboard, which came in quite a few matchups, but I was glad I didn't have it main board. And then the reason why my entire attack lineup was Order Water was because I was running 3 copies of Big Cyclone in my sideboard. And this card was hilarious because no one ever expects to see it in an Order deck. Let's put it that way. So you bring it in on game 2, and they think they can discard you safely, and you get free Big Cyclone triggers on them, and all of a sudden they're like, hold up, I thought you were playing Order. And then they're rummaging through your chain, and they're double checking all the stuff, and meanwhile they have to deal with a Big Cyclone. And it was great. It locked out quite it helped me in a lot of games. It was really, really viable and really live. I'm really glad I did this. And that's why with the attack lineup, right, everything is Order Water except for the Death Valleys, and the Death Valleys usually came out for the Big Cyclone, and that's just kind of how it went. And then you just have to be a little bit more cautious about how you were going to be running your blocks. But that didn't end up being too big of an issue for me. At least I didn't find. By the time you play Big Cyclone, your opponent's usually less inclined to try and push attacks through to you anyways. So you're usually not blocking all that much after that, unless they think they've got a kill turn lockdown anyways. And then I was using Revenant to just make sure I was drawing water-based blocks. So that's the deck I ran. I know it was a little bit jumpy, but that's what I did. Like I said, I went to Deadlock a ton, just a ton. If I could get into Deadlock, I could scale out, I could sculpt my staging area how I wanted, I could combo off, draw just an absolute butt ton of cards, and then just murder people, play fairly long strings because I could commit everything I wanted. I could Armor Expert good checks on top of my deck to continue playing good things, and then I could just Frost Hammer them after their entire staging area was stunned out. And yeah, it worked. It worked wonders, and I would definitely be updating this deck to see if I can get it a little bit more tuned. I don't think it's like the strongest deck in the format by far, because just nuts out aggro still very real, and that's what I ended up losing to, was anything that could go off very early before I had any chance to set up. Those decks still shut me down. So that's kind of why I say this thing's far from optimal. You'll need to do adjustments for your local meta. You'll need to do adjustments for different things, but don't disregard Sub-Zero. Ridiculously strong. Ridiculously. Yeah, so anyways, that's the deck profile. Hopefully you learned something from this. Hopefully you get some ideas off this. Hopefully you realize you need to run Cryomancers in Sub-Zero, because holy Moses, that is so strong. It was the strongest thing I did all weekend, for sure, was doing Cryomancer plays and just bodying people with tons of cards. Super fun. Anyways, till next time, this was Toy.